This is Douglas Montagna from Grand Valley State University, and it is my pleasure to be speaking with Mr. Julius Van Oss, and he's going to be telling us about his experiences in the Pacific during World War II. And I'll start out by asking a little bit about what you were doing and what life was was like for you before World War II.
Well, it was pretty good. I graduated from high school, couldn't get a job right away, but then I did, and finally get a job, and I was working at the Dunn Manufacturing Company. We were working on gun brackets for M4 tanks, and I was working on a lathe, and I worked there for about 6 months before I was drafted.
Okay, so you graduated from high school, and you remember what year?
I graduated in 1941.
Okay. Do you remember what it was like for you during the Great Depression? Was that something your family had a hard time?
Yes, I do remember. We were poor, but I didn't know it, I guess, since I wasn't quite old enough to really enjoy it. But I noticed in school that a lot of my clothes were made over and that sort of thing. But we lived on a farm always, and so we always had food. And unlike a lot of people, they had a short ration on food. But we had plenty of food, and we could butcher chickens, and we always had something to eat. And so from that standpoint, we were okay. But drove an old car, and my dad was managing a farm for someone, and that's what we made a living at.
Was it a dairy farm or one of the?
It was a poultry farm.
Okay.
That's why we always had lots of chickens to eat.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember being aware of the crisis of World War II coming up, like in the late 30s and early 40s, or did it kind of appear suddenly?
I guess I was aware of it because my dad was very interested in news always, and that rubbed off on me too. So I did listen to a lot of news on radio, and I was aware that this was creeping up on us. And then on the morning that the Germans moved and kind of took over I guess it was the Sudetenland that they took first. And I saw the headlines in the Chicago Tribune that morning, and I could say, well, we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we had been shipping things over there for quite some time under the Lend-Lease, so we were involved already.
And you remember Pearl Harbor, like what you were doing when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, I went out on a date that night, and I came to a friend's house, and I didn't know it at that time, and when he came to the door, he said, "We're at war." I said, "Oh, war? Yeah." He says, "Pearl Harbor." Well, where's Pearl Harbor? Well, I didn't know at that time, but I found out later, and soon, of course, everything was busy with it. And every time I saw this girl that I went out with, I always called her my Pearl Harbor girl.
Were you worried and fearful after Pearl Harbor, or were you confident that the country was going to get through the crisis?
I wasn't looking forward to going into the service, though I didn't. If everybody went, I went too. That was it.
Mm-hmm. So once Pearl Harbor happened, you knew you were going into the service, or pretty sure you were going to.
I was pretty sure I'd end up in the service.
Mm-hmm.
I had, of course, had already drafted people before Pearl Harbor, so I knew a lot of guys were going into the service at that time.
Mm-hmm.
They were being drafted, and they were going into training supposedly for a year.
Mm-hmm.
There was a song called "I'll Be Back in a Year, Little Darling," and it turned out to be a long year.
And were your friends being drafted?
Yeah, a couple of them were drafted before I was from the neighborhood. Our one neighbor was a doctor, and he was drafted, so he went in the service and went overseas almost immediately to Iceland and served there during most of the war.
And then, do you remember when you got your draft notice?
Oh yes, I got my draft notice in March of 1943, and I was sworn in on April 16th of 1943 and went on active duty a week later.
Okay, and you were working in
I was working at Dunn Manufacturing Company at that time, but I quit with about a week left to go.
Were there people who worked in jobs like that who stayed working because they were essential for
If they
production?
were very essential, like tool and die makers, that sort of thing, were very essential, but mine was pretty much a production job, so that wasn't a big deal. But a lot of guys did stay home if they were older, and they weren't drafted right away, of course, and someone did manage to stay home through the war. And farmers also, if they had one son in the service and they had only one son left, he was pretty much allowed to stay home to help manage the farm.
Were you still living on the farm by 43?
No, we weren't. We weren't.
And then what happened once you were drafted? I mean, like, where did you immediately go to report?
I reported to Fort Custer, Michigan, and I was there about a week. Got my shots, got my clothes, and so on. I was on my way to Greensboro, North Carolina, for basic training in the Air Force.
Okay. And what was basic training like?
It was pretty miserable. It was hot down there, and it got muddy, and they had beautiful red mud in the soil, and you'd clomp around with mud sticking to your feet about 4 inches thick, and it was hot all the time. And though we did have barracks to live in, and it was just a new camp, so it wasn't too bad, all in all.
Did all the guys there get along?
Pretty well, yes. Yeah, the worst thing we had was trying to get in the movie, because everybody trying to get in once. And the movie was Baton, and we were having war right there. No, but everybody they were pretty well behaved.
And how were you treated by the drill instructors? And
Oh, they were pretty good. Yeah, they yelled and so on, but that was part of the program.
so there was nothing. I mean, it was hard, but nothing really like
No,
dangerous.
in the Air Force, they didn't believe in that so much. In the infantry, it was a different story, because there was 13 weeks of basic usually in the infantry, sometimes 17.
Did you get a choice whether or not to go into was it the Air Corps or the Air Force?
When I was drafted, I got the choice of going into the Army, the Navy, or the Marines. And I couldn't see myself trying to dig a hole in the deck, so I thought, well, I better go in the Army.
Okay. And did they then assign you to the?
And they assigned me to the Air Force.
Yep.
Yeah, because that was a separate entity at that time.
And in basic, did you learn how to fire rifles, and you learned how to infantry tactics?
Yeah, we had the rifles only on the rifle range. Unlike the infantry, you had to carry it all the time there.
What did you mostly learn in basic? Just military discipline?
Military discipline, close order drill, and guard duty, and all that sort of thing. And it wasn't bad, really.
Like a typical day, would you have any of your own time, or were you pretty much on their
Yeah,
time?
and at night you'd have your own time. We were right near the PX, and we'd go over there, and some guys drank a 3-2 beer, and and it's awful sweaty though. I didn't have air conditioning.
Well, air conditioning was rare anywhere back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it was obviously quite a luxury. What town? You said you're near Greensboro?
Greensboro, North Carolina.
Okay. And how long was basic?
Basic was 6 weeks, and that's when things changed a little bit, because I was taken to a place one afternoon and to take some kind of test. I had no idea what it was for, but it was an IQ test, and this was, I found out later, for the Army Specialized Training Program. And so I took the test, and apparently I passed with enough IQ to get into, they thought, college. So I went to the North Carolina State College to be classified for the ASTP, which was a program to have a cadre sort of thing for places that they might move into that would be able to organize it and set up for troops that might come in and occupy. I got to where they classified me, and they classified me at going into engineering. And I was there about a week, I guess, in North Carolina, and then they shipped me to the University of Illinois, which was pretty nice because I was near home. For me, that was near home, about 350 miles. And I said, well, you're going to college. Wow, well, not bad.
So you just took regular college classes?
Yeah, they took college classes. They set up the curriculum. Yeah, and it was a wicked course because you had to take math, you had to take physics, geography, military, of course, and gym and all that sort of thing. And oh yes, chemistry also. So they were throwing it at you.
Had you had these subjects in high school?
I had 3 years of math in high school. I was fortunate because some guys hadn't had any math when they got there, and they had to go through a primer course to get them started.
Did you consider yourself fortunate to be in that program?
It sure was better than basic training. The food was good, and I think there were like 95 male students at the University of Illinois at that time that were civilians, and the rest of us were U.S. Army. So it was pretty nice. And they had USOs both in Urbana, Illinois, and Champaign. It was only about 2 miles apart, but hey, we had lots of nice things there.
And you lived in the dorms?
We lived in the dorms. We lived in the fraternity house, and that was pretty neat.
Okay, and then how long did that program last?
That was about 7 months. Then the Army decided they could dispense with it because they couldn't find the use for it, I guess. I don't know why they ever did it, but a lot of us were in college at that time. We had guys in Hope College at that time too. And some of them moved from the University of Illinois to Hope College in the second term. And so I met some of my friends when I came up here on furlough.
And then where did they send you once this program ended?
Then they sent me back to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, and back in the Air Force at that time. And then, well, what are we going to do with them now? And they sent me to Lake Charles, Louisiana, Air Base. And I was there as, worked in the supply room for about 7 months. And then they assigned me to, it was getting to winter, and they said, hey, we can't leave them down here in the summertime. So they sent me up to Sioux Falls, South Dakota for the winter for radio school. And that was to be a radio operator mechanic. And usually those guys that flew in the B-24s and the B-17s were radio operator mechanics. The radio man took care of the guns and so on. From radio school, you would be sent to gunnery school and all that. Well, we were in radio school 13 weeks out of 18. Well, on my way to getting through it, and the Battle of the Bulge was going on, and they said, hey, we need some help in the infantry. And so I was sent to the infantry for 6 weeks of basic at Camp Livingston, Louisiana. And then they sent me over to the Fort Meade, Maryland, to be sent over to the European theater.
What was the basic training like for the infantry? Was
a lot different than the Air Force. They gave us guns, and you went through everything there. The obstacle course, and I don't say they try to make it tough on you, but they got you prepared for a lot more than you did in the Air Force. And you learn to keep your gun clean, that sort of thing.
Now, as you're going, from place to place, did you have any choice in where you went?
No.
So just
they
wherever.
Didn't say, well, would you like to go in the infantry, or would you like to go here, or would you like to go there? But no, I had no choice.
Was that particular, I guess, apprehensive or scary to not know where you might be in 3 or
It was
4 months, or
scary,
is it just?
especially if you didn't know where you were going, you know, which way you were going, but if you headed south, you knew you're probably one of those camps down south.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of infantrymen were trained down south, because they like it to train down there because it's rugged and
Mm-hmm.
you have snakes and things like that to deal with.
So when you know you're not going to be going to Europe, then what happened to you?
Well, when I learned that the war ended while I was in Fort Meade, Maryland, and I guess they had to make some hasty decisions, so they decided to switch our uniforms from winter to summer, and they said, we're going to ship you across the country to San Francisco, and you'll be going the other way over to the Pacific. So, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Got a nice train ride across the country, about 5 days, and got to Camp Stoneman, California, and unloaded there. Saw San Francisco on our way to where the boat landed and picked us up. And then we knew we were headed for the theater, Pacific Theater of Operations.
Mm-hmm.
That was, well, there were lots of guys going, so, and you saw this big ship at Pier 13 in San Francisco, and you said, wow, that baby's going to ride on the water like just as smooth as could be. Wrong. Going out of San Francisco, I was seasick for a day, which wasn't bad. Everybody was.
Had you ever been out to sea before?
No, I hadn't. And
you were going to the Philippines?
we were on our way to the Philippines, but I didn't know that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
We stopped in Pearl Harbor, and we were there overnight. It was kind of interesting because we were sailing into Pearl Harbor, and we were being followed by 3 submarines. They were our own, but it made you kind of nervous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we did land in Pearl Harbor, and we stayed there.
Were they the only ships with you, or you were in a convoy?
We were with 2 ships at that time, out of San Francisco. And going out of Pearl Harbor, we were in a convoy of 15 ships. We stopped at Pearl Harbor, then we stopped at the Marshall Islands, and then we stopped at the Caroline Islands. And at the Caroline Islands, they had a Navy recreation island, and they got us off the boat for a day and went ashore in the landing boats, and that was kind of interesting. And saw where the coconut trees were growing and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And you could go swimming, and gave you a couple of beers and a Coca-Cola, and of course it was all warm, but it was nice. Getting out of the ship was good.
And what were conditions like on the ship?
They weren't too bad, but you were sleeping 5 high.
Mm-hmm.
But we slept out on deck several nights.
Was it hot?
It got pretty hot
Yeah, I
down
can
below.
imagine. What was the food like?
It was beans and coffee in the morning, and never any milk. But the rest of the meals weren't too bad. As long as they got you something in your stomach, that's all that mattered, I guess. But the beans and coffee kind of took me by surprise.
And what did you do all day on the ship?
Tried to stay away from officers.
Mm-hmm.
That might put you to work,
Mm-hmm.
because they had details on the ship that they would help either the sailors or otherwise they'd have some detail the Army was doing, and the other fellow and I would usually, they had landing boats on the side, and we'd sleep underneath the landing boats during the day quite often.
And then where did you eventually end up after?
We ended up in Manila
Mm-hmm.
after 31 days at sea, and we got off the ship there by landing craft. It was rather interesting going into Manila because one of the sailors aboard ship had been down that trip before, and he says, "Oh, by the way, there's Corregidor and there's Bataan over there," and so
Mhm.
I kind of saw those places. Didn't go ashore there, but
And you knew what had happened there.
I knew what had happened
Mhm.
there, and I was very much aware that the Bataan Death March, of course, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't very well known at that point because it hadn't been, a lot of the guys hadn't come home yet
Mm-hmm.
to tell about it, and those that did come home. So I was interested in that, and they got us to shore on a landing craft and got us organized, and they got us on trucks and took us up to what they call a replacement depot in the Philippines there. So it was about 19 miles out of Manila.
Mm-hmm.
And we were there for a couple weeks, I guess, until they decided where to assign us what unit. And another friend and I were out walking one night, and we ran across I saw the sign that says University of the Philippines Agricultural Station. So I said, let's go in here and look around. And we did, and there was a lab there, and the Japs had smashed everything in that lab they could smash. And then I ran across some guy that was kind of the groundskeeper there, and talking to him, and said he could speak English fairly well. A lot of the Filipinos could. And he told about some of the things that happened during the Japanese occupation there.
How were the Japanese still on the island by this time?
Yes, they were there but they were up in the hills by that time.
Mm-hmm.
And he told of one incident where the Japanese soldiers had filled this girl up with a hose, filled her up with water with a hose, and then she was pregnant, and then they used her for bayonet practice. And that just took me by storm. I couldn't hardly believe that they would do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I could not believe what savages they were. And in the Bataan Death March, the guys that were there, in the book where they wrote about that, it was if you didn't bow to them, they hit you with the butt of the rifle in the head. That was their. But they treated their own soldiers that way too. They were rough on them. They hit them.
Mm-hmm.
Officers would hit the men. But the guys on the Bataan Death March, of course, they didn't get the proper medication they needed. They were not treated for malaria or all these things, and so many of them died. And they're the only ones that could haul them away as their own men. You know, they'd haul them out, and a lot of guys just gave up and just died. It was too horrible to withstand.
Were you aware of how the Japanese were treating the?
I wasn't at that time. I got on later out of reading books about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew one man, a local man, who was on Wake Island, and he was taken as a Japanese prisoner, and he was sent to Japan proper, and he worked in the coal mines up there. And the coal mines up there were not very pleasant. So they were about 4 feet high, and they had to work in that and dig coal, and you can imagine how they looked after a day in the coal mine, and they were long days. You usually worked about 12 hours a day.
What were you told much about the Japanese by the people in basic training or your officers?
We had some movies and so on ahead of time, but mostly that was aimed at Germany more than Japan.
Mm-hmm.
The Japan thing came about later because we weren't getting any news from Japan or from the guys in the islands very much. Of course, when they invaded an island, you'd hear about it, but once they invaded Luzon, then it kind of opened up a little bit, because then they found out about the Death March and that sort of thing, and
Mm-hmm.
the nurses that were captured that were on Corregidor, and they were kept prisoner in Manila, and all through the war. And they suffered from starvation too. They didn't have the food, and so that was a bad feature about it.
Now, what else happened in your time in the Philippines?
I was hauled up to the 6th Division one morning, and with what they call the chow truck. They take warm food up to the troops when they could get to them. I joined my company, which is F Company, and first sergeant says, "There's a hole over there, maybe you can borrow that one." And okay. It was a rocky peak sort of, and we were there in a high ground, and the first day in combat, he says we're going on, the squad leader said we're going on a mission to get a couple of guys out that were the squad leaders yesterday, and they had been killed. They were the first ones, you know, in the squad, and they were leading the squad and rounded a term, and the Japanese ambushed them and shot both of them. One guy had 97 bullet holes in him, I remember. And that was my first day. That was kind of a eye-opener, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But then we moved on up and gradually took the grounds, and
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't actually in the forefront. I wasn't a squad leader or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you kept your gun loaded, and you were kept very aware of things at night.
Mm-hmm. Was there shelling around you?
The Japanese had nothing left to shell with except mortars. We had mortars, and they did utilize those, but we were able to stay pretty clear of them or stay sheltered from them.
Mm-hmm.
But they had rifles, of course, and small arms, pistols, and so on. And I remember one night we had a bonsai attack where they come screaming over the hill, yelling, "Die Yankee," and so on. And makes you a little nervous.
No, were you there? When they came and you?
I was there when they came over the hill, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't in the front lines. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was another unit that was up ahead of us, and they took care of it. And they
Mm-hmm.
withstood the attack.
Now you were at this time an infantryman.
I was an infantryman, and one day, it was 4th of July, 1945. We were kind of hung up. We were trying to advance and further into the Japanese area, and we were kind of hung up, and they apparently called for an airstrike. So remember, this was the 4th of July, and we were all standing there watching. We could see the airstrike, and they came through, first of all, with P-38s, the twin engine, and strafing with the wing guns, and then they dropped napalm bombs all over that hillside. I thought, how can anything live through there? But Japs do that. And then B-25s came through, and they dropped high explosive bombs on the hillside and pretty well blew the top off of it. And then they came through strafing with all their wing guns going, and I said, what a 4th of July.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, we had all the fireworks we could handle. And it did quiet down, we did get further up, and eventually we went back to our camp in the back, and behind the lines again, and we were there for a few days, and then we had to go on another mission up to a little town called Antipolo, which was basically a lot of native huts and a schoolhouse, one schoolhouse for native huts. But it was up on top of a hill, and it was rice paddies to get up there, and 7 miles from any road, passable road. We trooped up the trail there to get up there, and stayed there for 7 days. While we were there, they flew our food to us out of C-47s. They would fly by, and we could see them. They were about on the same level as we were on the hill. And they'd open up the doors, and they'd push the rations out to us. They'd land in the rice paddies, and the natives would go down to get them for us. Which was pretty nice. They'd dig them out of the mud.
Mm-hmm.
And we ate pretty well, and we didn't have to do anything during the day, talk. And I had a foxhole buddy, his name was John Gurek out of Chicago, and he and I talked about a lot of things. And then we said one night, well, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we woke up in the morning and the war was over? And it was.
Mm-hmm.
And we got the news by an artillery man who came up. He was sent up there as a spotter for the artillery. He says, the war's all over, he says. Got this big bomb, and it'll be over soon. Yeah, right, all right. But we got it on a ration box also. War is over.
Mm-hmm.
And so we knew it was over. And so we shot all our ammunition up except one clip that we had kept to go back with, and that was it.
And you were pleasantly, to put it mildly, surprised.
Oh,
You weren't
yes.
expecting it to be over
We were
anytime soon.
overjoyed. We were overjoyed.
I want to backtrack a little, something I wanted to ask you about. Were there kamikaze attacks when you were coming in, or had they stopped?
They had stopped.
Okay.
Though the guys that were on the ship I came over on had experienced a couple of attacks on their last trip.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't hit them, fortunately, but yeah, they were doing that at that time. That was the last ditch stand for the Japanese.
Mm-hmm. And when the war ended, had the Japanese resistance on the Philippines ended, or were they still fighting there?
They were pretty much wiped out.
Mm-hmm.
General Yamashita came down out of the hills, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
When he was the leader of the forces there, and when he came down out of the hills in his automobile, we knew it was over.
Did many of the Japanese soldiers surrender, or most of them ended up being
Some
killed?
surrendered, but they didn't surrender easy. They would just die, rather than die with honor.
Mm-hmm.
So we tried to handle that for them.
Mm-hmm. And then what happened? When the war's over, then what did you do?
Well, they were going to train for the attack on Japan.
Mm-hmm.
We were going to land on Honshu Island.
And you were expecting to do that?
We were expecting to
Okay.
do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so before the war was over, before it was actually over, that was what we were expecting to do, to land on Honshu Island, because we did train a little bit
Mm-hmm.
for that when we were in between skirmishes up in the hills. So, but it was over then, and then what? Well, boy, what are we going to do now with these guys, So they close order drill and all that sort of thing, and we were in the rest area. We could take our time eating food and so on, and we were all having a good time. And then they said we're going to move on down to Lingayen Gulf, and they moved us down there, and we were on the beach, so to speak, at Lingayen Gulf, and camped there. And we were there for about a month, I guess, before they said, well, we're going to go up to Korea on occupation duty.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. We had a lot of volleyball games and stuff like that there, and I said I'm going to get out of my infantry company if I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw an ad in the paper, the little paper that we had for the regiment, wanted a PA operator, public address operator. I said, hey, I could do this. I went to radio school.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to the officer up there in the INE, Information Education Office, said, hey, I can do the job, I think. And, oh, okay. They hadn't had any other people apply for it, so they gave me in the afternoon, they gave me a Jeep, and on the trailer of the Jeep I had a generator, and inside the Jeep I had 2 turntables and a bunch of these big 16-inch discs I take to the outlying companies and play them for them for an afternoon.
Mm-hmm. This is in Korea.
This was in the Philippines,
Philippines.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And gee, that was pretty nice,
Mm-hmm.
sort of a disc jockey type thing. And then of course that
What can you remember kind of music you were playing?
everybody wanted to hear Bob Wills and his
Okay.
Texas Playboys,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
San Antonio Rose,
Mm-hmm.
and Rum and Coca-Cola.
Okay, yeah.
Very, very popular.
Mm-hmm.
And then we wrapped that up, of course, when we were going to go to Korea, and we had to pack everybody aboard the ships.
Mm-hmm.
And this was just at the time that the Okinawa typhoon happened. and that was a really rough one. And we stayed in port for 3 days, didn't sail. Then the typhoon kind of ebbed a little bit, but boy, we still hit a lot of it, and I was seasick for 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
I was miserable.
Mm-hmm. Did every now and then one of those ships go down just from like storms? Was that ever something you
Very
worried
seldom.
about? Rarely.
Very seldom. It was usually the larger ships that were damaged the most, like aircraft carriers.
Mm-hmm.
Little ships would bounce around, and they wouldn't get hurt much.
Mm-hmm.
They would be a rough ride, but they wouldn't get hurt much.
Mm-hmm. And then once you got to Korea, what was it like?
In Korea, we landed in Kunsan, Korea, so that was a novelty. First night we stayed in a warehouse alongside the railroad, and we had sleeping bags, nothing but cement floor. So we slept in the sleeping bags and we scratched all night. It was lice all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy. The next day they moved us over to a high school building and gave us cots. And so the first thing we did, we spread the cots out with a bedding on it, and we set one of these DDT bombs under it and let them spray.
Mm-hmm.
And killed all that vermin that we had in those bags. That worked pretty good. We set up there, and I set up the I&E office in regimental headquarters there, and I played records during the day, and that was kind of neat.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine came along that I had known before in another outfit. His name was Cedric Gargano, and I found out he was a radio sergeant for the regiment. He says, "Hey," he says, "I got to have a radio operator." He says, "If you sign up with me," I said, I'll guarantee you there'll be a T4 in a couple of weeks and maybe a T5 in about a month."
Mm-hmm. And what does that stand for?
That's a technician 4th grade and technician 5th grade.
Mm-hmm.
It's an equivalent to a sergeant
Mm-hmm.
grading that carries the same pay as a sergeant would get. So I thought that over, but not for long, and I said, "Yeah, I'll do that." So then I was a radio operator again,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a pretty good job. And I would basically be there in case the phone lines went out, and we had to set up communication between regimental headquarters and the outlying companies. And I had that happen to me once. I had to go about 30 miles to an outlying company and set up a radio with a crank generator, and I I could get as many men to help me as I wanted to, so I set up and I established communication to
Mm-hmm.
regiment, and we didn't have to use it, but that was quite a night. It was dark when I got there, and it was snowing, but we got it all done, got an antenna up outside.
When you were in Korea, was there any expectation of any more fighting?
No, though the Russians, of course, had everything above the 38th parallel.
Mm-hmm.
They were in charge of that. And they were in charge of most of the industry, and they were in charge of the power companies. So they said whenever the Russians got mad, they'd turn the power off on us. But we got through that, but we had no idea that there would be a war.
A war in Korea later.
No, I just didn't think we thought we'd go home. But before I went home, the regimental radio sergeant was the officer in charge of all communications. Said, "Hey," he says, "if you sign up again," he said, "re-enlist," he says, "I'll guarantee a master sergeant rating, which would be equivalent then of about $150 a month." Wow, that was something.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, thank you.
You were never tempted to become
Oh,
a
no.
lifelong military
I
person?
said, I'm going home.
Okay.
So I did. We got aboard ship, and we made one stop in Japan. I don't know what we stopped for, but anyhow. from there on it was home, and we took the northern route up near Alaska and down to Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And we arrived at Seattle about 11 o'clock at night, and they said, everybody's keep it cool and stay in your bunks for the time being, okay. And we got up in the morning, and then we had a nice bunch of girls and guys out there playing music for us, and it was a great homecoming.
Mm-hmm. Were you officially discharged yet?
No, we weren't discharged yet. And so we got off the ship and went to Fort Lewis, Washington. And there we were served by German POWs.
Mm-hmm.
Food, and it was good to taste all the good
Still,
food.
this was like early '46, or
This was early '46, yeah.
okay. They were so they hadn't been. They had obviously hadn't been released yet.
No, they hadn't been released yet, and we could keep them as long as we wanted to, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So we enjoyed all the good American food again, and milk and everything. And one incident I am thinking of that one evening in our barracks, there were both colors in the barracks at that time. That was unusual, but
Was that the first time you had been in an
the
integrated?
first time I'd been much in contact with blacks, and but I never had anything against them really. I always got along with them whenever I ran across them. But one night, MPs knocked on the door and they said, all the black guys outside. So we had one guy said, wait a minute. What do you want? Well, some guy had been hit over the head at the PX, and it was a black guy that hit him. So they wanted all the blacks out, and they were going to run them until somebody fell out and said, I'm to blame. Well, this guy put up an argument, and we all did. We all stood up for him. He said, these guys were in the barracks all night so far. But they wouldn't take no for an answer. So they took him out, and the colonel of the post, even the guy who ran the post, Fort Lewis, came to our barracks and argued, these guys got to get out. We got to let them go. Anyhow, that was my first incident that I really saw the treatment that was not right.
Did you see many African Americans in your time in the service, or was this one?
There were some in the Philippines, yeah. Yeah. There were some in the Philippines.
But not in segregated units.
They were in segregated units there, yeah. And they were usually in service companies. That means they took care of trucks and stuff like that. I didn't see any in combat. And I don't know if that was supposed to be that way or not. But no, I didn't. But then they got us on the train, and they said, we're going to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, to get out of the service. And so we took a nice ride across the country again, and this time was the north, Glacier National Park, and those areas that we got to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, and some of the guys waited a little bit. They wanted their teeth fixed or something before they went out. That's fine, but they gave us our discharge, and I said, I'm ready to go home. So they got us on the train and head for Chicago, and from Chicago got home. And that was it. I thought, the world is all right. Good to have Mom's apple pie again. That's sort of
I can imagine. Is there anything else about your experience in the service that you want to talk about that we missed? Or
no, all in all, I'd say it was a very good experience for me. I always say I wouldn't take $1 million for it, and I wouldn't do it again for $1 million. And but it takes you away from home and takes you away from loved ones, and you follow their bidding. You're not the boss, and you can put up an argument. You'll be sorry if you do.
Were there any other soldiers that you came across a really hard time with the discipline and who were always bucking the system?
Oh yeah, we had a guy in one of my barracks in basic training. He was wealthy. He was from Detroit, and he said, I'm not going to put up with this. And So he went one weekend and he went to the good hotel in Raleigh, North Carolina, and had himself a time, and came back on Monday morning. He said, "That's what I did. I put him in hard labor for a week."
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but he took it
Mm-hmm.
philosophically.
Mm-hmm.
It was worth it.
Have you kept in touch? Did you keep in touch with any of your fellow soldiers over the years?
Yes, I did. One interesting thing, and that is, I graduated from high school. I graduated in Dowagiac, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
and graduated with a kid who moved to Chicago right after graduation, and so we kept contact. And
Mm-hmm.
he said, "When you get to where your camp is, let me know. Let my folks know, and I'll do the same thing." Well, so he went on a Monday, I think. I went on a Wednesday or something like that in the service, and so I wrote to his folks, and he wrote to mine. Found out we were both at Greensboro, North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and we were about 6 blocks apart. Well, when we left there, he went to Chanute Field, and I went to University of Illinois. So again, we were relatively close. We could go to see each other. He had a car where he was, so he'd drive down and see me on the weekend. Then we left for Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. I didn't know where he was, but I found out later he was around the corner from me.
Mm-hmm.
But that's when we parted.
Mm-hmm.
But I kept contact with him anyhow. He went in the Philippines. He was on a different island than I was. He was on Mindanao.
Mm-hmm.
But that we kept close, and we did after the war for a long time, kept close together. I think the last time we saw each other was at a high school reunion.
Did you do anything with like the American Legion or any veteran VFW?
I belonged to the American Legion, and I also belonged to the Dads of Foreign Wars, because my son was in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And my granddaughter has been in the Marines.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Did you encourage them, or they just did what they thought was right?
I didn't encourage them.
Mm-hmm.
They just wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm. So your son volunteered.
My son volunteered, and so did my granddaughter.
Mm-hmm.
Volunteered for the Marines.
Mm-hmm.
She was in Okinawa for, I don't know, a couple of years.
Do you think it's better the way the military now, it's all volunteers? Is that a better way to do it?
It's great if they can do it without, but
Mm-hmm.
yet I say it wouldn't hurt anybody to do a year of service
Mm-hmm.
and learn what the military is all about, and it would teach a lot of them a good lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And not because I want to be tough on them or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just learn what discipline is and how
Mm-hmm.
to cope with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be a good idea.
So, I mean, in the total scope of your life, how important was this experience?
It was very important. I often think back to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I read a lot of books about the military,
Mm-hmm.
even today. I'll grab a book about the military and read about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, particularly if it's in some of the places I've been, it's more interesting. But I still like the Band of Brothers and
Mhm.
things like that. I really enjoyed that. And but I enjoy funny stuff too, like See Here, Private Hargrove, and what have you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there anything else?
I think that pretty much wraps it up.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It was a very interesting talk, and hopefully people will find this interesting and useful.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.